I grew up in Northern California in Sacramento with a single mom. My dad wasn't around, and I had an older brother who was about 6 years older. Uh, my grandfather, my mom's dad, throughout my life played a pretty significant role in how I was raised and how I behaved. Uh, he would pick me up from school. I'd go to his house. I'd do homework every day, and then he'd eventually take me home, and my mom would pick me up from grandma's house. And that was pretty much me until about ninth grade. And then in the middle of ninth grade, my mother moved to San Francisco, and I was playing basketball. I went to Catholic high school, and I didn't want to leave, so I stayed in Sacramento with her brother and my grandparents, basically, and kind of floated between 2 to 3 houses. And I ended up at my Catholic high school. Our Catholic high school went to the state championship basketball. I was pretty good, decent. I probably could have played in college. I went to UC Davis, and I was gonna play. And then my grandfather and I were driving to college one day, and he looked at me dead in my face, and he said, look, I can't tell you the word that he called me, but he said, look, you can't play basketball, go to school, or you can't play basketball, try to go to medical school, and chase women.
Yeah.
So so I gave up basketball, and then I started to focus on it's like my third year of college when I really started to focus on, am I good enough? My whole life people told me that, I wasn't smart enough, or I wasn't going to be able to go to medical school because I didn't do this or I didn't do that. And I never believed anybody. I always went about my own business and figured it out. And so I just kept working at it. And I applied to medical school after college. And the school I wanted to go to where I interviewed was Iowa, because their learning environment was amazing for medical students. We had our own building. They had their own everything. And I really wanted to go there. So one day I get this letter from Iowa, and it was a thin letter, and I was like, man, I'm not in. And I opened it at my girlfriend's house at the time, and it said I was number 104 on the wait list. So, the out-of-state wait list. So most people would look at this and they would say, oh man, I'm waitlisted. And they, just sit there and be waitlisted. But at that time, and it's kind of defined who I've become, I was like, I can sit here and be waitlisted, or I can let them know where I want to be. So I called every single day, and I got to know the people in the office by calling, and I just said, hey, it's Jamie again. I just want to know, have I moved on the wait list? And I was like number 100, and then I was like number 69, and then I was number 34, and then I was number 18, and then I was number 4. And then this all happened within the matter of about a week or two.
Wow.
And then she called me, and I said, I'm in. And she said, you're in. And I was like, oh my God. And I couldn't believe it. And at that point, I said, well, this is how I live. I go after everything, and I don't listen to what anybody has to say. It can be done, period. So that brought me to, kind of where I am today.
Awesome. So, growing up, did you always consider yourself you were going to go to med school or be a doctor, or did that change?
Yeah, I wrote it down in the 5th grade, and Sister Ann, our counselor, made us come up with 2 long-term goals and 2 short-term goals. And my 2 short-term goals at the time were, get straight A's and score 20 points in my next basketball game. And then my 2 long-term goals were get a scholarship to North Carolina or Georgetown and go to the NBA, or go to medical school and become a doctor. and I put that on my grandparents' refrigerator, and it stayed there for like 10 years.
Awesome. Did you get that 20 points?
I did get that 20 points. You know it.
Awesome. All right. So as far as where you went to college, was that always where you planned on going to college? Did you apply other places? What made you decide to go on your choice?
Well, to be honest, when I was in high school, I was relying a little bit on basketball, and I actually didn't get into UC Davis at first glance, or at first applications, and so I really wanted to go there. And if it wasn't for my best friend's parents, I probably wouldn't even have applied. But whatever. The basketball coach at the time was in contact with me, and I told him I didn't get in. And then I also told a friend of ours that I didn't get in. And then the next day, our family friend told me, "Oh, you're in. You'll get your stuff tomorrow." And I don't know. And the basketball coach thought, "Oh, well, maybe it was us." And I was like, "I don't know about that." But I got my stuff the next day, and I was in. Yeah. So I got, borderline lucky with that. And I wasn't a bad student by any stretch, but it was, it was more being persistent about it.
How big of a change was it transitioning from high school to college?
Well, I mean, in high school, you can kind of play basketball, play a sport, do your homework, and you're going to get a good grade if you do your homework. In college, you really have to put forth some extra effort. You may not, you have to really know how you learn to be successful in college. And that takes effort. It takes a lot of effort. And I remember my friend, Vanessa Calderon, who is a doctor as well, which is funny. We were juniors in college, and she literally taught me how to study. She taught me how to learn, how I learn. And we started going to this coffee shop in Davis called Mishka's, and I started reading, and the more effort I put in, the more I understood what my brain needed to be successful. And it takes an extraordinary amount of effort to know that. And I can literally remember the day that everything kind of clicked. And it was just like I was studying organic chemistry, and it was just like I put forth so much effort in this class, and it was just like a snap. And it just kind of, my mind just went from memorizing to understanding and having a foundation. And once you have that foundation of knowledge, and you know how you learn, you don't have to memorize anything anymore. You just can know things. It was crazy.
Yeah. I feel you on that, because growing up in high school, I was a straight A student, but I studied to make a grade, not to actually soak in the information. So
yeah.
Once you get to college, you can make good grades, but once you hit the real world, or once you hit those higher level classes, you can't just make the grade. You gotta be able to soak in the information and be able to apply it. And so,
right.
I hear you on that. So you mentioned that your study habits. Could you give us a little tidbit on how your study habits changed? What did you do that helped in your study habits?
I think that I set aside some time to really read. And I mean, I read every page. I didn't skip anything. And I didn't try to read for my test. I tried to read for myself. I tried to understand what I was reading, not memorize what I thought the teacher would put on a test. When I was taking that organic chemistry class, I finally understood why the periodic table was arranged in the way that it was arranged. And it all again, it just clicked. My study habits, again, it just went from, instead of knowing that 2 + 2 is 4, I understood literally that you put 2 on your fingers and another 2, and then you count, and it's 1, 2, 3, 4. There's a difference there. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
And my study habits changed because instead of memorizing that, the 5 causes of hypoxemia are, this, and this. Once I looked at the physiology of the lung and knew how it worked, I was never going to forget it. I would always know the 5 causes of hypoxemia because I could explain it because I knew it, not because I had it memorized.
Did you know what type of doctor you wanted to be once you started med school?
No. When I started medical school, I wanted to do what everybody else wanted to do. I wanted to be, a urologist or an orthopedic surgeon or something where you got to do stuff that everybody else wanted to do.
Mm-hmm.
And then as I started studying for classes, I realized that I liked everything.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't want to let go of anything, and the way in which I thought about a doctor was somebody that could help anybody, anytime, any place, anywhere. And eventually, for me, that narrowed down to pulmonary and critical care. And that's how I figured that one out, was through that.
Okay.
I feel like all the other specialties, you have to let go of certain things. Whereas with pulmonary and critical care, I got to know everything. I mean, there was a 26-week pregnant patient that I had to transfer to the ICU the other day, like just 2 days ago. Like, I still got to know, a little bit of obstetrics. Like, I have to know that. So it's so that's why I like it. Love it.
Oh, go ahead. What was the difficulty transitioning from college to med school?
Yeah, good question. Med school, the transition from college to med school was easier because med school became more focused. So it was all physiology, all medicine, all microbiology. It was just that I was in a class surrounded by people that were ridiculously smart. And I knew the only way to compete with them was going to be outworking them, was just going to be able to study for an extra hour or, stay in this class an extra hour, go ask Dr. Rubenstein more questions to kind of get to know him and to get to know what he would like and what he likes so I could figure out maybe what was going to be on the test. So that the difference was that med school was easier than college, but it was probably easier because it was more focused on my dream and my goal.
So what was probably the most difficult part of med school for you? Was it class, or what was the most difficult part?
The most difficult part of medical school was learning how to appreciate subjects that I didn't quite like. So what I had to learn to do was to figure out why the people that were teaching me the subject, I tried to use their enthusiasm about the subject to keep my interest and to get me enthusiastic about their subject. So I would get to know attendings and professors a lot more than my classmates because I had to. I remember I didn't necessarily love neurology, and one of my favorite professors in medical school was a neurologist, and that's because I took the time to get to know him, make fun of him, make fun of me, and we just kind of shot the shit so much that I didn't want to let him down and disappoint him and not do well on something. So I studied for it, and I learned how to have a respect for every subject because in the ICU it applies. So I don't know. That was probably the hardest thing.
Yeah. So once you graduated med school, passed your boards, what was the something that surprised you about actually being a doctor that you didn't realize or you weren't prepared for?
So I did a fellowship in pulmonary and critical care, which is like residency. I passed my, board, medicine, critical care, and pulmonary, so I'm triple boarded. But the one thing that people don't realize is that most physicians don't realize is they spend all this time working so hard to impress your attending or to impress your colleague, right, another physician.
Mm-hmm.
But you lose sight that everything that we do every single day is for the patient. And physicians overall don't do a great job of explaining things to people. And that's one. Two would be the business of it. So in private practice, it's not about how smart you are. Nobody gives a shit how smart you are. It's, are you likable? Do people like you? And are you available? Your best ability is availability. And so I try to be those things. I try to be available. Whether or not somebody likes me, I don't care if somebody likes me or not, but I try to be nice to everyone, even the ancillary staff, the environmental service person that's cleaning up the room, the nurse's aide. I try to be nice and helpful to everyone because that matters. That matters more than you think.
Love it. Love it. So where do you see yourself 5-10 years from now? What goals do you have set for yourself that you still want to achieve that you haven't achieved yet?
So I'm really big on educating using social media. You can see that with my Instagram, I think, a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
My YouTube channel. I hope to expand that aspect of my life a little bit, and I hope to eventually get on screen and teach medicine to people, because I think they need to understand their body and they need to understand the language that physicians speak in the hospital, so they can get an understanding of what their body's going through, why their loved one feels that way, and what we can and can't do. It helps them understand the limitations of medicine.
Interesting. Well, my final question is just anything that we haven't touched on, something that could benefit high school kids that are or college freshmen that are just now starting their journey that may have an interest in med school, being a doctor. What would you like to say to them?
Get ready for the ride. There's so many roadblocks. This test, this score, that score. You need to get this, you need to get that. You need to volunteer here, you need to volunteer there. Just stay focused, get it done. And if you want to do it, you can do it. Just be persistent. And don't ever let anybody tell you that you can't, because you can. And I'm an example of that. At some point, you do have to be enthusiastic about what you select, and you do have to perform. And you will. Understand that there's going to be a breaking point, and you're going to have to put forth so much effort to find that breaking point. So sometimes you have to have insight. You got to check yourself. You're going to ask yourself, did I really study for that test? Could I have done more? You probably can. You probably could have. That's okay. If you find holes in your game or find holes in your knowledge, plug those holes. That's okay. If you leave somewhere and you have questions, that's okay. That's all life. That's what you're supposed to go through.